All right, ladies and gentlemen, interview with Australians for Assange. Who here is a supporter of Julian Assange? As many of you know, Julian Assange is the founder of WikiLeaks. He's one of our own, Australian-born. He has been detained for many, many years, held up in the Ecuadorian embassy, and now 3 years in a high-security prison. Many of us believe that Julian Assange is a political prisoner. That's right. WikiLeaks. He definitely upset some people in some very high places over the years. When we think about WikiLeaks, we think about the Afghanistan war logs. We think about the footage of journalists being gunned down in the Middle East. We think about Hillary Clinton's emails, 2016, and the grotesque emails exchanged between the Clinton associates and the former campaign of Hillary Clinton's election run, John Podesta. Absolute undeniable proof that extremely inhumane acts were being carried out by these people, unfortunately ignored. Julian Assange, in my opinion, is a hero. In my view, he's an Australian hero. He is a seeker of the truth. Personally, I'm inspired by Assange, and I hope that MCJ report can follow in a similar direction. So I was really, really happy and proud to interview two guys who make up the group called Australians for Assange. They're great guys, Walter and Mills. They run a Facebook page at Australians for Assange. The link is in the description. So I really encourage you to follow their work. They're tremendous people and they're doing a great job. So I'll just tell you a little bit about their organisation before I play the interview. They're a Melbourne-based advocacy group for Julian Assange. They've facilitated many demonstrations and displays of public support, light shows, billboards. They're very, very active. They also communicate with Julian's father, John Shipton. So they have that line of communication, and they work alongside many other Assange advocacy groups, both here in Australia and overseas. They're tireless in their work. They're defenders of truth and open press. And according to Walter and Mills, if Julian is taken down, it could very well mean the nail in the coffin in terms of free and independent media. Of course, we seek for a separation of media and state. That's what we do on MCJ Report. And these days, whether it's Australia or other democracies around the world, the mainstream media is beginning to resemble that more so of a state-controlled media outlet such as the Global Times in China. So we desperately need to keep independent media alive. And Julian Assange is what can I say? This man is basically the godfather of independent media. Yep, that's right. I said it. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the interview goes for about 35 minutes. So make yourselves comfortable. I present to you Walter and Mills from Australians for Assange. All right, we've got Walter and Mills here. First of all, fellas, welcome to the MCJ Report.
Thanks for having us, mate. We're big fans, so I love your work.
Hi, Morgan.
Really, really glad we've got you out there doing some great stuff.
Not a problem at all. It's our pleasure to have you here, and I know that the audience is very grateful to hear from you as well. Both of you have been involved in great work advocating for Julian Assange. I know that so many of us are supporting him. What is unfortunate, of course, has been perhaps the response from the government in relation to Julian's captivity. Many of us are in agreement that Julian is a political prisoner. So first of all, would you fellas mind just talking a little bit about the current state, what you know in relation to Julian Assange, and is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
That's a great question, Morgan. The current state is, after a long battle for his freedom, Julian's still sitting in a maximum security prison in London, in Belmarsh, which they call the Guantanamo of England, of the UK. Without charge, he's effectively on remand. On January 4, his extradition hearing wrapped up with the judge ruling that he couldn't be extradited to the US. On health grounds, essentially. The US have appealed. They appealed immediately, and this is where we're at the moment. There's a case tomorrow which relates to the appeal and how it's going to proceed. So it's literally tomorrow. They're going to work out. The US are trying to widen the brief on what they can actually appeal in relation to the extradition hearing in January. So the date for the appeal hasn't even been set yet. So that would likely be a little later this year with COVID, with what's happening around the world at the moment. It's a little bit tricky, but this thing's going to drag on for another year, another 2 years. We don't know. So
they call it murder by process.
Murder by process, or punishment by process. This guy is innocent at the moment, innocent till proven guilty, yet he's in his third year now in a maximum security prison.
It's unbelievable. It appears that there's a lot of legal gymnastics being carried out right now, trying to work out new and never before used ways of perhaps sentencing Julian, of whom many of us would consider has done more up to this point than simply serving a sentence. So how's the legal defense looking? And if you were to give us just a bit of a prediction in relation to what might happen, or is the Australian government lending any assistance to Julian?
Well, the Australian government hasn't really given Julian any assistance. They say they are providing consular assistance, but they're effectively giving him zero.
Can I add that Marise Payne, our foreign minister, she continually refers to, look, we've made over 20 attempts to contact Julian, and he hasn't responded. But she never mentions that they've never made a phone call to Washington. So they put the onus on the victim, not on the perpetrator, and they deflect from, they're saying, well, he's not responding to calls. It's like, someone's drowning. Oh, well, they haven't put their hand up to ask for help, so we'll just let them drown. Instead of saying, well, we haven't made a single call to Washington to try and negotiate a solution.
Right. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's just a matter of not wanting to upset Uncle Sam, or what do you attribute it to?
Unfortunately, yeah, our politicians aren't very bright. We essentially want to be allies and loyal allies, but, we don't want to be lapdogs, and we have no politicians that are able to negotiate a solution to say, look, we're happy to be allies, and there's a way around this. There's no need to, persecute one of our citizens. But in effect, the whole idea of smothering journalists and censoring and silencing this hiding of criminal activity is criminal. So the Australian government is complicit and participating in the abrogation of proper democratic principles. Unfortunately, our hands are tied. We sort of have to either give up our morality or have some really creative Australians to be able to maintain our sovereignty and our morality and negotiate an ally without compromising those.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of Australians are really disappointed that the Australian government didn't come out batting right from the beginning for Julian Assange. There were maybe a few exceptions. I seem to remember Pauline made a few remarks standing up for Julian, but the remarks of support have been really few and far between. So the question needs to be raised: what exactly has Julian done that is so different from many of the mainstream media outlets? We know that whistleblowers are given a voice through various mainstream media outlets throughout the world. Documents are released by one means or another and published. So why do you think Julian is being held to this standard whilst other, big, powerful mainstream media corporations are essentially able to do what he did and get away with it scot-free?
I think the main reason is that most other mainstream media are controlled. So to a degree, they publish what's acceptable or allowed to be published. Probably an exception when they did the releases back in 2010 in relation to the Afghan and Iraq war logs, collateral murder included. But very quickly after that, they turned on Julian. I think the powers that be put them in their place essentially. And what they've done is what they're trying to do, which is what they're really leaning on now, is silencing dissent. And they're really, around the world, they really are starting to go after whistleblowers and journalists. They're raiding journalists. They're really trying to put the pressure on.
They raided the ABC. They don't want anyone whistleblowing.
So I think that's a big part of it. And I think this has been, personally, I think this has been coming for some time. The Australian government, the Australian, I guess, the Australian military and the Australian position in the world probably has been complicit in a number of things that maybe many Australians aren't really across. And they're not across things that have been done with their tax dollars and in their name. And I think that's probably one of the reasons also why they've been reluctant to go after, to protect the Australian citizen and go after those persecuting him for so long. Successive governments, Labor, Liberal, hasn't mattered. They're all of the same view and position. And it just seems to be a little bit of a taboo subject where they know this is out of bounds and they kind of just tick boxes and they kind of say the right things, but they don't proactively do anything to try and help this Australian who's innocent until he's proven guilty. He's an innocent man. He's been held now, arbitrarily detained for 10 years.
Yeah, and it was, really when things were starting to heat up with the Afghanistan cables that you mentioned before, and many governments, but I think particularly the US government was beginning to feel very uncomfortable in relation to really the amount of power and influence that Julian and WikiLeaks had assumed, even though that one of the key principles of living in a democracy is supposedly there's meant to be a separation of media and state, but we seem to see that separation gradually but firmly closing in on itself. In Hong Kong, we saw a democratic news agency shut down by the Chinese Communist Party, Apple Daily, a big loss for democracy in Hong Kong, and Julian, a big loss to the democratic principles of not the West, but everywhere in the world. But it seems that WikiLeaks is still functioning and they're still communicating with whistleblowers. So even without Julian on the ground, what's the state of WikiLeaks like today? And are we still expecting to see big stories coming out even in Julian's absence?
Yeah, look, I think WikiLeaks has they took a big blow with all this. So they really weren't functioning since. Essentially,
sorry if I interrupt. Look, Julian is the engine room of WikiLeaks, and the thing people have to understand, Julian is quite a unique character, and I mean that in the fact that he's this brain that has a real good understanding of computers, and he was able to create, and he was very forward thinking. He was able to create systems that are now being employed by, people like the Washington Post and the New York Times, but he created Dropboxes and secure encryption. So Julian sort of created WikiLeaks, and it gave the impression that, this was this big organization with a lot of lawyers and minds working, but he essentially was the core of it. So the fact that they've taken him out of the equation, WikiLeaks is still operating, I believe, and we keep saying we need some more leaks, but
yeah.
We're working on it at MCJ Report. I mean, I admire Julian for the work that he's done, but it makes people feel scared to put their best foot forward in relation to blowing the whistle on fraud, corruption, government misconduct. You look at the case of Julian, and it appears the powers to be have said, all right, this is the biggest man in the business. We're going to make an example of him. We know several of his close contacts have disappeared, have been allegedly killed. And perhaps it scares off a lot of people. But What would you say to people who are considering going down a similar line to Julian and WikiLeaks?
I've got a quote here. There's a guy, he's the special rapporteur, United Nations special rapporteur on torture. And he's been one of the biggest advocates for Julian in exposing the torturous methods that they're using against Julian. And he's come out with a really good quote, if I can read it. And I'm not a very good reader without my glasses, but he says, this is a recent interview, he said, whistleblowers, which are the people that supply WikiLeaks with the information, are the alarm system of society. They're like a fire alarm. If there is some smoke, the whistle blows. It tells you that there's something wrong. Come and correct it. Because if you don't, your house is going to be burning. What we see now is government starting to prosecute whistleblowers and the journalists that publish the information. Thereby, they are basically switching off the alarm system of society, which means that anything that goes wrong is allowed to fester and to consolidate into criminal structures behind the curtains, which then you can no longer get rid of. That's why they are prosecuting these people, because they want to protect those criminal structures. So that's Nils Melzer's quote. And
that's a brilliant quote.
This is essentially what's happening today.
Yeah.
And, Julian Assange's case, it's not about Julian Assange. It's about controlling the narrative, controlling the media, and they're doing it across the board. To this day, anyone who dissents against the government narrative is shut down, deplatformed, smeared, called a conspiracy theorist. So what they're essentially doing with Julian, and this is why we're fighting for Julian. So I've never met Julian, but I know he stands for democratic processes and principles. And we need to save those processes and principles. We can't criminalize truth-telling. We can't criminalize freedom of the press, freedom of speech. So
Yeah,
this is part of why we got onto Julian, because we could see this will lead on to further abuses and keeping the public in the dark
and we're seeing that. We're seeing the gradual transition from free press to controlled press all around the world. Even organizations that claim to be private and independent simply acting as a mouthpiece for the government in their respective countries. We're even seeing, as you guys know, field experts who happen to hold different views from, say, the government or particular government policy that's in force at the time, being blacklisted, banned, not welcomed into debate with other experts held by governments, shut off of social media, slandered, smear campaigns, as you said, hit pieces in the media. And we're entering this really dangerous time, in my view, throughout democratic nations in the world, whereby having an alternate view is essentially considered a crime. So I would like to get both of your opinions on where do you think this is heading, and what in your mind would be an effective strategy for somehow steering the ship of free media back into the hands of the people and away from the government and the powers to be.
You're the answer.
People like yourself, Morgan. We need more people like yourself. You mentioned whistleblowers before. There are still courageous whistleblowers coming out. WikiLeaks just did release a tranche of about 17,000 documents just recently, a few days ago it was, and I haven't quite had a chance to sift through that yet. But they are still operating, as you mentioned. They have been hamstrung with what's happened. Whistleblowing has dried up a lot, particularly for WikiLeaks. But
the baton has been passed on to independent media sources, people like yourself who are prepared to put themselves out there and challenge the narrative and not be repeaters, but be reporters.
Similar to, you'd be familiar, Morgan, with James O'Keefe and Project Veritas in the US, which are doing some wonderful work there and exposing the global media structure that's in place. So we need both. We need people, courageous people like yourself, who are prepared to stand up and report and be real media, but we also need the whistleblowers. So We really need people that can come out and stand up. And we've got to make it as secure as possible. Now, I know you've got a secure platform, Morgan, that you're promoting at the moment for this kind of thing. Paramount is people's safety, but more and more people standing up takes away the danger to a degree. If it's only a handful of people, they become targets.
Another thing we need to do, Morgan, is we need to save Julian Assange, believe it or not. They are trying to, if they go ahead with this prosecution, they will have, in fact, criminalised truth-telling. So
and they set a precedent.
Once they set that precedent, it's hard to come back.
Precedent.
We need to stop them doing that, so whistleblowers and journalists can continue to do their work.
I see exactly what you're saying. I mean, should this all go to plan by the powers to be, and Julian receives a life sentence, or God forbid, even worse, which we know is a real possibility, that will of course set a precedence that, as you said, telling the truth, publishing true documents. To my knowledge, I don't believe there has been a document published by WikiLeaks that turned out to be fraudulent, or very few out of the absolute millions.
Zero. So they've got 100% accuracy rate.
100%
accuracy rate. So
100%.
this is an important fight. We can't afford for that precedent to be set. So one of the questions I have here is, we've got 25 million Australians. We've got many millions more around the world who are batting for Julian. What can the average person do to support him in his challenge?
Well, call your MP is probably the first thing. Support entities like us, Australians for Assange. We're online. We've got a website, australiansforassange.com.au. We are very active with people on the ground on the Australian front of the Assange campaign. We work closely with his dad, and the main thing is to build awareness, because believe it or not, too many people aren't really across what's happened with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. So number one is building more awareness. And as people come to understand what's happened and what's at stake, they start putting pressure. It's a collective pressure that gets put on our politicians. And as we all know, that's the only way our politicians actually act. If there's enough pressure, they will have to do something. There's a parliamentary group at the moment of 28 members that's part of the
cross-party members.
Cross-party members. So cross-party groups, Liberal, Labor, Independents, Greens, that are, they call it the Friends of Assange, which is a group within the government who are vocally supporting that the government do more to bring Julian home.
Call your MP and tell them, why haven't you joined the Friends of Assange group? Because this is Julian hasn't broken any Australian or UK laws. He hasn't done anything criminal. This is a political case. Australia has a right to defend their citizens.
And it's in everybody's interest. So if your politicians are really looking out for your interest, everybody's interest, they should be vocally, actively going to bat for Julian, because this is going to impact everybody at every level of society to some degree in the long run. Julian Assange in this case is like a litmus test. If they're able to take this guy who's done so much and literally shown the world so much in relation to how power really works, they're able to take this guy and set a legal precedent that they can do this, you could be next Morgan. Any of our independent media that are actually taking a stand against the mainstream rubbish that we hear these days will be subject potentially to the ire of the United States, China, any country around the world could say, right, we don't like what this person's saying or publishing or reporting on. It's a national security issue, and they could potentially come and grab you. And our governments have set a precedent where they've done nothing and just let it happen.
That's right. And these types of new restrictions and assaults on our freedom, they always seem to come under the guise of national security. Well, we're doing it to keep everybody safe. Hong Kong, the national security law. We better shut these people down, stop them from publishing because they are a threat to our security. And unfortunately, a lot of people seem to believe that particular line. And unfortunately, we see that generally people only take action when things really start to affect them. But this is a creeping process, and I hear your message loud and clear. And this is a true fork in the roads in history in relation to maintaining a free press and allowing the people to have a voice against these huge monstrous governments that rule over us. So I agree that Australians should get involved, and I still want to know how I can help through my platform. So what can I do personally? What message can I push out there?
So firstly, I just want to say, Morgan, what they're actually doing is they're defrauding the taxpayer. The government is, involved in criminal activity, which takes money and wealth away from the hardworking Australian and collects it all and puts it into this little group of people that own more than the rest of us combined. So they're not working in a national interest. They're working in a very limited interest. And what we need to do is realise what they're doing, realise they're defrauding us. We, as Australians, are an extremely wealthy nation. Everyone should have a Ferrari and a mansion with the billions of, we've got
resources,
copper and diamonds and uranium and coal and so much wealth here, and there's only 25 million people. Everyone should at least have a Ferrari in their driveway. We're happy to sort of have a nice little Kia Sereno or whatever that model is, brand new car, but we don't realise, if we really understood how much wealth is being taken from us, and we should be the example of the rest of the world. We should have the best hospitals, the best education systems. We probably do have one of the best health systems, which is they're trying to bring down and compromise rather than prop up. We should be building more and more hospitals, not going more and more into debt. So they're defrauding the country. We're not producing anything anymore in this country. We're selling our resources. Our top 10 corporations are owned 80% by America, 14% by China. So what's really happening is we're getting just enough to keep us happy.
Scraps. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And going back to
you're right, and it's definitely true. And you can follow the money trail and look at the history of trade deals that have been formulated by our politicians, which always seem to benefit the same group of people, not the broader sort of working community, I would argue. And we end up here with really incompetent Australian politicians that would prefer to privatise everything, sell it to foreign corporations, and then at the end of the financial year, Liberal will say, hey, we made our books look good and we had this great surplus, but ultimately we're getting our sovereignty sold off from under our noses, and the average Australian is ending up with less and less at the end of every month. And it's an absolute disgrace. So I'm happy that you called it out. And they don't want us reporting on it, I bet. Look at the media. The media is acting like state-run media in Australia. What's the difference between Channel 9 and the Global Times in China? One claims to be private, one doesn't claim to be private, but in my view, they're operating the same way. So, Walter, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the flip side too, if you look at what we've been involved in overseas over the past decades under the name of democracy and freedom in line with our allies, you look at some of the stuff that we've been involved in, which is an embarrassment. Some of the damage that we've helped commit overseas in all the wars, collective wars, and most of these wars we've been lied into, by our media. If you think that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's like they're taking away from our hard-earned tax dollars, and they're using and funding that for stuff that most people would not approve. And they're doing it without our consent. They're doing it behind our backs because our media is not really reporting on it. So it takes independent media such as yourself to actually shine a light on this stuff. So going back to the point of what can you do yourself, Morgan, you can help promote the campaign. You can help promote our page. We've got a fundraiser. We're involved in trying to set up campaigns and rallies and all sorts of stunts and actions that we've done in the past to raise awareness out in the community. A little bit tricky in the COVID era because we're locked down, we're not locked down, we're not locked down, but we've got to work around that. All those things take time and money, of course. We volunteer all our time, but the more we can raise awareness for people, the more we can get the word out there, the more pressure that will get put onto our politicians, which at the end of the day is key to making them act. There is a lot of support growing for Julian in Australia. It's taken some time, but we are growing the support, and we've just got to get it to a point where it just can't be ignored anymore. There's a petition at the moment. Philip Adams put together a petition which is had tabled in Parliament twice now, in the lower house and the upper house. It's sitting at over 600,000 signatories at the moment. We'll provide the link to that as well, Morgan, if you could pop that up on your site. The more people that sign and share that petition, the more pressure that puts internally, because it's a live petition that's been tabled in both houses of Parliament, and it's just growing and growing and growing. So it's things like this in collaboration with all the brilliant work other supporters are doing around the world. Many countries, many governments have set up groups like the Australian group. There's a really big one in Spain. There's one in Germany. There's one in Italy, I believe. So there's a lot of pressure coming at all levels. And this is what it's going to take, because this is a critical issue. As we discussed, it's drawing a line in the sand. So if this goes one way or the other, it's going to have a massive impact on our future generations, for our kids' kids. So it's something that we just must not let happen.
Okay, well, if I can add to that.
Please, Mills, yes.
A lot of people say to me when I describe the situation, they say, well, we've got a democracy and what we do is we vote. If in 3 years' time you're not happy with the government, you vote against them or you use your vote. Well, I've sort of been educated, because I used to think the same way, but I've spoken to people and they've educated me. Voting is the least you can do in a democratic society. That's the absolute minimum you can do, is just wait for every 3 years, put your vote in, and then go back to whatever you're doing. What actually effectively creates a good democratic society, or a good society in general, is being proactive. So don't wait for your vote. Be an activist. Be a proactive. Write to MPs. Go to meetings.
Go to rallies.
Talk to other people. Be a proactive person of this community, which most people do. Most people talk about, current issues and stuff, but don't limit it to just the mainstream media. Do your own research. Get in there. I mean, people like yourself, you're offering an alternative view. We need people to take responsibility for where they get their news from, vetting it themselves, not letting the government or the ABC or Channel 10 vet it, being skeptical and saying, no, I need to be sure what's happening is actual fact. I need to see all the evidence. Don't give me your version. So voting is don't lean on that. It's important to vote, and we hope people vote for you. And there are people that you can prop up, but put yourself out there. Be proactive. Be an active member of this country. Be patriotic.
Very, very good. Yeah, and I could totally agree with your sentiment. Now, what is the best way for our audience, to get in contact with your organisation, Australians for Assange?
The easiest way at the moment is probably through the Facebook page we've got, Australians for Assange. We've got a few pages aligned with the Assange campaign locally and internationally, but the Australian Army is Australians for Assange. We're also affiliated with the Assange campaign, which is assangecampaign.org.
People in Adelaide.
We've got lots of supporters around Australia. Adelaide's for Assange. We work closely with. There's a group in Sydney, the Town Hall group in Sydney, who proactively are out every Friday at the steps of the Sydney Town Hall, promoting and creating awareness for Julian.
Melbourne Visual.
Yeah.
Friday nights, I think. I'm not sure now in lockdown, but Friday nights generally they're under the clocks at Flinders Street.
Yeah. So there's lots of people working on this. But we just need more. We just need more people to support. People support in different ways. I mean, some people can't get to rallies. They can't get to actions or events. But even just sharing stuff online, signing that petition, which we'll give you all the links so you can put them up on your site. Just getting involved at whatever capacity people can. And as Mills said, talking about it, bringing up the subject in conversation. It seems to... the media just doesn't talk about it, therefore it's not on the agenda, therefore people don't talk about it. So we need to keep promoting it and raising that awareness and keeping it in the limelight. Really, really important. That's probably the best thing we can do at this stage.
Beautiful. Well, I'm certainly going to list your organisation on my website as a friendly organisation of MCJ Report. I would... everybody watching today, I encourage you to go ahead and follow the Facebook page Australians for Assange, and I'm certainly happy to have both of you back on the show. I'm a big supporter of both of what you guys are doing. I think it's terrific. I've always been a supporter of WikiLeaks and Julian's work, and I'm very concerned in relation to what's going on by him. But it's also putting a bit of fire in us. We've released our line MCJ Tips at protonmail.com, and we're having people already step forward from the ADF police and also from healthcare, and they're beginning to open up. So, we're going to keep pushing as hard as we can, and this is a huge fight, and ultimately we want Julian freed, but we're gonna continue this fight either way, don't you think?
Yeah, look, I think in the end, personally, this is just my opinion, I don't think they're going to be able to take Julian, because I think the support's going to get to a crescendo, to a point where they just won't be able to do it in the face of what's happening at the moment around the world. But that's just my personal opinion. Of course, to ensure that becomes a reality, we just need to keep building and building and building support. But look, congratulations to you, Morgan, and your show. It's great. I watch it, I tune in whenever I can. It is in the spirit of what WikiLeaks did for many years, and started back in 2006. It is a true distinction between state and media, which is what's disappeared over time now for a long time. The media is the checks and balance, or should be the checks and balance for the state. That doesn't seem to happen. So the more outfits like yourself that we see out there, I think the better our society is going to
Thanks.
progress.
And very happy to use my platform to support the cause, support your work, WikiLeaks, Assange. Anything we can do at MCJ Report to help, we're really more than happy to do. We're big supporters.
Fantastic. Thanks, Morgan.
No worries. Thank you so much for your time today, both of you, Walter and Mills. Guys, once again, the Facebook page is Australians for Assange. Make sure you give it a like, and I hope to have both of you fellas back on the show really soon.
Definitely. Thanks, Morgan.
Thanks, Morgan.
Thanks, fellas. Once again, once again, a big thank you to Walter and Mills. Thank you for being on the show and doing everything that you do. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to support Australians for Assange, you can go ahead and give them a like on their Facebook page. I'll put the link in the description of this video. And that just about wraps it up for this evening. So, we've had a good episode tonight, about an hour and a half. We have MCJ Report 100 coming next week. So the initial plan was we wanted to do like a live venue, but unfortunately that looks like it won't be happening. So I'm gonna have to think of something pretty interesting, something impactful to do for MCJ Report 100. If anyone has any ideas, let me know. mcjreport@protonmail.com. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening. I'll catch you tomorrow night at 8 p.m.